Professor Timothy Tong, RGC and panel members, Professor Chin, President of Ningnan University, distinguished guests of the university, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the RGC Forum. I'm Sisi, the Master of Ceremony today. In the past 3 days, the subject panels just finished the assessment of proposal under the General Research Fund and other funding scheme. Today, we are very pleased to have Chairman of the RGC, Professor Timothy Tong, to host the forum and the 5 panel representatives to share with us the observation and comments from the panel. And after the experience sharing session, there will be a question and answer session. May I now invite Professor Timothy Tong, RGC Chairman, to give us opening remarks. Professor Tong, please.
Good afternoon. Great to see all of you here, and thank you for coming to this RGC Forum. I'm extremely pleased because I see so many friends from my old school, PolyU, and also meet some new friends here today. RGC finds this forum extremely valuable in order to provide an opportunity for the RGC panels, panel chairs, and university researchers, professors to interact. As you know, RGC has been staunchly supporting the dynamic development of the Hong Kong research by promoting academic, translational, and applied research with a view to establishing Hong Kong as the regional education hub. In the current academic year 2023/24, just to give you an idea, more than 2.4 billion Hong Kong dollars have been used to support competitive research projects and fellowship fundings. This represents an 11% increase compared to the previous year. And more than that, several years ago, the Hong Kong SAR, Special Administrative Region Government, created the Research Endowment Fund. And it has about 52 billion Hong Kong dollars in this fund. So the fact that we were using $2.4 billion, as you can calculate, it should be a sustainable effort for some time. Doesn't mean that we will not try to increase that fund in the future, but we may have to wait for a better economic time in order to do that. But the 2.4 billion Hong Kong dollars is not the only funding source for research, because in the block grant to the sector, there is also an amount provided to support research at the universities. And the block grant and the research matching grant scheme altogether brings the 2.4 billion Hong Kong dollars up to 7.5 billion Hong Kong dollars. So that becomes quite substantial. Okay. In terms of the level of research activity, the number of research projects being undertaken at universities has also shown an upward trend. The data shows that there is a 10% increase in applications for the General Research Fund grants. In terms of number, it is now about 3,500 applications that have been received. And for the early career scheme for the young professors, there is an even more substantial increase in applications. It went up by 21%, okay? And in terms of numbers, it now is right around 630 this year. Notwithstanding the increase in number, it is heartening to note that the general quality of the research proposals has remained meritorious and highly competitive. And on this note, I'd like to highlight that in addition to supporting individual research work, the RGC has recently stepped up its support in taking forward collaborative and interdisciplinary research in a number of key strategic and thematic areas. In particular, the Council has been encouraging strategic research which enhances Hong Kong's competitive advantages and better integration into national development. In this vein, the Strategic Topics Grant was launched in August 2022, quite recent, to encourage collaborative research on specific topics which help Hong Kong tackle imminent challenges and tap emerging technologies. We are very pleased to note that the universities have continued to submit excellent proposals in the recent round of exercise that can contribute to the social and economic development of the society. Furthermore, I'd like to underline the importance of collaboration amongst universities and among different disciplines with a view that complex problems and high-impact projects often require participation from talents from different organizations and from different disciplines. The RGC has set up a number of research schemes, including the Collaborative Research Fund, Theme-Based Research Scheme, Areas of Excellence Scheme, and Research Impact Fund for supporting high-quality, cross-disciplinary, and cross-institutional research projects with different ambits. I'm confident that such funding programs would facilitate our universities to take research to yet another level of achievement in the coming years. Last but not least, I'd like to make the point that RGC attaches great importance to the development of young research talents. RGC has increased the budget for ECS, the Early Career Scheme, in response to calls from local research community for bolstering support for young researchers. And we have increased the budget by about 30%. The launch of the RGC Postdoctoral Fellowship Scheme in 2019 and the Young Collaborative Research Grant under the CRF in 2022/23 academic year are some other examples of RGC's efforts in cultivating Hong Kong's research culture. Later this week, believe it or not, on a Saturday, the RGC will consider some proposals to enhance these two schemes with a view to bringing an even stronger impact to our young researcher community. So please stay tuned. And before I close, the RGC would like to extend our sincere appreciation to Lingnan University for graciously hosting this event. The university's strong support in the organization of today's forum has been instrumental in its success. I think we owe an applause for President Chin and his staff here. Thank you. We are also very pleased about the many commendable research achievements made by local universities during the past year, which indeed are fruitful results of the dedication, talent, and hard work of our research community. It is through your tireless efforts that we continue to push the boundaries of knowledge and transform to become robust cluster for research. So you owe yourself a very big hand too. Please, don't be shy. So let me stop here and hand over the floor to our esteemed panel chairs and their representatives. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Professor Tong. Please be seated. So the sharing of the panels now begins. May I invite Professor Wang Xiaofan, Deputy Chair of Biology and Medicine Panel, to share the observation of the panel. Professor Wang, please.
Yeah, I think Chairman Tong just made a comprehensive summary of what our feeling. So save me time, I don't have to repeat it. I only want to say as a panel member for the last few years, also we had a discussion yesterday when we finished. There are 10 people stepping down after 6 years. What the general feelings about these 6 years? So the consensus is that we could say the quality of science in the biology medicine area every year increase. More and more competitive applications. I think some people will complain it's so hard to get grants. Well, the reality is we have a good, many excellent, outstanding scientists joining the workforce in Hong Kong. So we have great hope and really fulfill the theme just Chairman Tong mentioned. So I think he also mentioned that it's so important to support the young people. We specifically yesterday to increase the funding rate for the ECS. From last year, we realized it was too low. So with this year, it's about 30%. So even though there's increased applications, we also give an increased total funding. So we hope this would lead the trend for the future, and also additional funding would come to support science, because even though economic downtime, the key is still to support particularly basic research for the long run of Hong Kong development. So I think I don't want to spend more time to give some chance to questions, because I had to apologize, I had to leave earlier, so they put my QA right after my short introduction. So I give it.
So we will now take the question from the floor. Please raise your hand if you have a question for Biology and Medicine panel. Our colleagues will pass you the mic. When you speak, please start by telling us who you are and which university you are from.
I have to say our panel covered very wide range of topics, from molecules all the way to ecology to clinical trials. So we could say in every area there's better and better science applied for grants. So that's the really everybody is so happy in the end when we discuss this. As a researchers, you really want to see science being emphasized, and also people do well. So we think the recruitment also successful. I think here is a good chance to report to Chairman Tong and other leadership. So we think Hong Kong's gradually become a much more attractive for young scientists to come here, because it used to be people think, well, Hong Kong may be very good business in other areas, but in the science-wise, for example, biology, medicine. But now we could say they're competing with some of the top places in mainland China, attracting from all over the world to come here to apply for grants. That's how we can see it. Yeah. So I do hope just to tell your friends, your colleagues, try to identify the most challenging questions, because we emphasize the impact and also innovation. So those are the two things when we evaluate, we always want to put the most emphasis on. So that's the message if you want to pass on to your colleagues who apply in this area. Of course, in the meantime, using this opportunity, we also want to say, in the long run, as Chairman Tong already said, there's endowment. There will be additional increase for the funding. We do hope there will be some adjustment. For example, establish so many new programs, but the number will be relatively low. So we think to solve this problem, we could consider elongate the current 3-year funding for some of the projects, because in the biology and medicine area, the trend is become 4 to 5 years funding to allow people to do in-depth science rather than superficial. So if to become a really internationally competitive, we believe this had to be changed. So the second thing is that each grant, the amount is relatively low, equivalent to the R21 in the US. So then that's why many of the top researchers keep writing grants. As the reviewers, we keep saying them the same person. Then we realize if they don't apply, their lab may have to reduce significantly. So we hope people can spend more time to focus on science. Some have 4 years, even 5 years, based on the nature of the science, and to give them full support rather than have to get 3 grants to support one project. So that's one message I think the panel want to see.
Professor Wang, we have a question over
you
there.
Do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Professor Wang. I'm Jonathan Fong from Lingnan University. Thanks for your comments, and I understand it's very difficult to make these selections after you said it's very competitive. I just had a general question about when you're categorizing these grants. I'm wondering, like you said, it's very diverse in medicine and biology. I'm wondering if there's any impact on how you categorize. For example, is there some way that, do you think about evening out amongst like medicine and ecology and molecules, things like that? Is there some way to, or is it just based on its own merit?
Right, we got your question because we actually discussed this exact question yesterday, because the panel covers so broad. Sometimes it is difficult to know if we have missed some field. For example, some field may have so few people working on, they don't have enough representation. The panel members may not have sufficient expertise to cover. They may, kind of fall through the crack. And then we want to consider this possibility, maybe have some kind of subdivision eventually to separate, because as you mentioned, we just heard your scientific presentation. I know you're doing very important conservation work. So you can see this is really getting into the area, like say how the turtle get trafficked out, seahorses get trafficked out, compared to many other applicants. For example, cancer biology is much broader, right? So we want to make sure in the future we probably have some measure to know some key areas. We don't want to miss them out just because, the reason that how we set up, right? So those are the things I think the council can support the panel to think more about it. When the biology and the medicine is so complex. Another example yesterday we mentioned is clinical trials. Hong Kong really want to do clinical trial because you have very good database with patients because it's covered by the government. And those resources can be used for testing drugs. But then the grants is too small to do such really valuable ones. So those are the things we need to raise in the future. Oh, there's another one.
We have one more question over there.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you, Professor Wang. I'm Professor Yan Qi Yang from Faculty of Dentistry of Hong Kong U. I want to ask a question regarding the resubmission, because usually we get some advice from our senior colleagues to say, oh, maybe there's not such high chance for a successful application with the resubmission, because it could be sent to the original reviewers and then they may not like it. So what I want to ask is, because we can get the review comments, and then sometimes it is like one of the reviewers really do not like these projects, but the others rate it pretty good. And then the other scenario could be all the review, or most of the reviewers, they think it's good, but there's some room for the improvement. So may I ask whether for the first scenario, maybe there's a lower chance for it to be rated later on if it was sent to the original reviewer. But if it is the second scenario and then we get improvement based on the comments, there is higher rate. May I understand in this way? Thank you.
Yeah, this is also we discussed yesterday, and resubmission indeed sometimes not being treated as truly resubmitted, because often get assigned to a new reviewer. Of course, there's a retirement each year. You may, the original reviewer retire, you cannot call them back. But on the other hand, we think we should pay more attention, because otherwise a totally new reviewer may not even look at it. Did you address the question? And then you had done all the work trying to improve it. You may have, faced a different questions, right? So, so in the future, we probably want to do that. And then the other thing is the reviews from external reviewers come back. Sometimes they could be one reviewers give so strong, opinion. For example, the other ones gave a 5, this person gave a 3. It will dragging down the average of the external review scores. In the end, when we line up, such a grant may be not in the discussion range, because when we run out of money, we're not going to discuss the rest. So such a thing, we also have a concern, how to look at such a situation, look at this particular strong opinion is reasonable or not, right? To give a fair chance for the grant. So we think we still have a lot to improve the review process. Yeah, those are the questions we actually do pay attention to. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Wang, for your insightful presentation. So now we will continue the remaining experience sharing session. May I now invite Professor Nancy Wong, Chairman of the Business Studies panel, to the stage and share the observation of the panel. Professor Wong, please.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm here to share the observations from the business panel. First of all, I wanted to thank the RGC chair for announcing the good news that I think our budgets for both the GRF and the ECS will be increased. Unfortunately, I don't think the increase has materialized as of this year's allocation yet, because we received a record number of proposals. I think for the GRF, there was an increase of more than 10%, and for the ECS, we had an increase of about more than 25%. So as a result of that, we find that, I guess, it was a real challenge for all the readers to actually manage, I think, on average, about 40 proposals as both Reader 1 as Reader 2. So it was actually a huge increase in terms of the number of proposals that they have to review. And also, given the budget allocation, because I think if we even maintain the same budget allocation, it means that the success rate is going to go down because of the huge increase in the proposals that have been submitted. A few observations that we do notice is the fact that there may be, it would be greatly improved if I think we have clearer communication with the research officers at various universities, in the sense that in terms of clearly, I think, communicating, I think, some of their needs for, I think, their budget requests and various other things. And it would be nice to know, I think, how each researchers would prioritize, I think, the budget requirements in order to make sure that they get to do their research, because unfortunately, I think oftentimes we do try to reduce some of the ask, because I think a lot of the times they embedded a lot of extras, just knowing that we are going to actually cut back. We want to make sure that the reduction is going to be reasonable, and to make sure that we could still allow the research to proceed successfully. And that would also give us the opportunity to fund more proposals. So that is coming from the perspective of hoping to help more PIs get their proposals funded. And the other thing is also perhaps to consider, I think, not submitting a proposal every year. I think there are different requirements and expectations in different fields. I think within the business fields and within some of the social sciences, Because if you are asked for a project that gets funded for 24 or 36 months, I guess the more of these projects that gets funded, it means that you also have diminishing, I think, time and resources to be able to focus on, completing these projects successfully sometimes. And also, I think one of the things that we do notice is that I think a lot of the PIs are not necessarily cognizant of the fact that they need to submit a completion report in 36 months upon the completion, and because we have very clear expectations in terms of the final outcomes. And I think sometimes, if they get penalized for that because they did not actually successfully submit those, I think, completion report, it could, actually affect their next round of applications. So I think maybe some of these expectations need to be communicated more clearly to the PIs, I think, when they submit the proposals. So congratulations on winning the proposal and getting them funded, but also be mindful of the fact of what you need to do in order to continue to be successful. I think that's really all that I have to share about the business panel.
Thank you, Professor Wang. Please be seated. May I now invite Professor John Lawton, Deputy Chair of the Engineering Panel, to the stage. Professor Lawton, please.
Well, good afternoon. It's an honor and a pleasure to be in front of you today. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Professor Shin for an absolutely lovely day today at our university. I think on behalf of all of us, we thoroughly enjoyed ourselves. Thank you. I'm happy to report that this year's panel, we don't really have any enormous concerns. I have a few small things to share with you, and probably the most significant comment will be a combination of something to celebrate as well as a cause for anxiety. So first of all, with some minor comments, one thing we noticed is scope. So as you write your proposal, it's natural to try to solve the entire world's problems, but you run the risk of making the proposal too broad, too unfocused, and importantly, not balanced with the budget. So don't hesitate to be specific in terms of the problems that you're trying to solve. The writing this year, we found, was extraordinarily good. This is a positive development, and I find that even more impressive given that the proposals are written in English. The quality of the writing is extraordinary. When resubmitting proposals, it's important not to simply make incremental changes, but rather to make a substantial change in your proposal and reflect upon the comments that you got from prior years on this. This does get noticed, believe it or not, if only small changes were made. One other comment is in terms of capturing the broader impact and the applications of your work. You, the experts, live and breathe your technology on a daily basis, and it's very natural to immediately jump into the nuances of what it is that you're doing and the problem you're solving. But if you can cast your research in a broader light initially in terms of what kind of problems can you solve, what is the impact, what could you do with your results if they were successful, that goes a long way, and I'll get back to that. And you can also focus on things like impact for Hong Kong, impact globally, impact technologically. The comment I wanted to make is a cause for both celebration and concern. And it's been stated already, and that is two things. One, the number of proposals that we are receiving is increasing. Number two, the quality of those proposals is increasing significantly. Those of you that were here last year heard me make exactly the same comment, and it continues. Now, it's a cause for celebration because this is a very good thing for Hong Kong, for UGC, for the university system here, and the university leadership. It is something to be celebrated. But it's also a cause for anxiety for the individual investigator because the competition is that much higher. And so you have to be competitive in order to be successful. So some thoughts. First of all, the proposal is a zero-defect document. Zero-defect document. And I know that that's a hard and unnatural thing, but if you can stay in that mindset as you prepare it and try to make it as exacting as possible and make sure that you've captured all aspects. Seek advice from your colleagues, particularly the successful ones. They have the voice of experience, they've been through the process, and they can often offer valuable advice. If you have a mentoring system in your university, avail yourself of that. If you don't, find someone to serve as a mentor. And by the way, find a way to repay them somehow, not financially, but offer to do something for them in exchange for the time they'll share with you. Again, this can be invaluable, especially to get a fresh set of eyes on a proposal. Volunteer to serve yourself as a reviewer, either with the UGC in one of its many forums, or in another capacity so that you can gain some experience. And avail yourself of any resources that the university offers. Now, the last comment I'm going to make comes from me. This is a personal comment. This is not representing the panel. This is not representing the UGC. This is just someone that's been in this business for 30 years. And that's the following. The reality is, reviewing proposals is a challenging process for a reviewer. There's often an enormous number of proposals that need to be done, and this happens in a very busy schedule. It's a challenging and tasking task. So keep that perspective. We like to think that we're sitting by the fire drinking a glass of wine. When we're reviewing these proposals, we are not. We have a bunch of other things that have to be done. So the kinder that you can be to the reviewer, the more likely you are to be successful. The other comment here, and it's maybe controversial, but you are guilty until proven innocent when it comes to a proposal. What do I mean by that? The success rate, even on a good day, is 30%. That means that the rejection rate is 70%. So for us to do our job well, we have to reject the majority of the proposals. So that's the mindset that we go in with. The intent is to say, okay, I expect to reject this proposal by odds, and you need to convince me that your proposal is worthy. It's a subtle but profound change of perspective. So if you can get the reviewer excited and enthusiastic about your work and the impact that it can have for the region, the university, and the world, then suddenly you begin to get into this realm of something that really can be transformational. And I think your chances of success will increase. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you, Professor Longton. Please be seated. So I'd like to now invite Professor Gigi Lok, Chairman of the Humanities and Social Science panel, to the stage. He shared observation of the panel. Professor Lok, please.
Thank you for having me being here. I'm Gigi Lok from McGill University. Thank you for President Chin for having us here. It's a great day. And thank you for Professor Tong announcing that we have more resources for young researchers. So let me explain to you what are under the HSS panel, the Humanity and Social Sciences. We have 4 subpanels in HSS. The first one is Psychology and Linguistics. Second one is Humanities, and then we have Social Science, and I'm also the subpanel chair for Education. So as you can see, these 4 subpanels have a common theme. We're about human beings. So across the 4 subpanels, we observe that the quality of a proposal has been significantly increased. The number of proposals have also been significantly increased. So that's a good thing, but again, like Professor Wong, and Professor Longton mentioned, it's a cause for concern, but also celebration. Our success rate, at least in the H4 education panel, has maintained across the years. And there are some tips that I want to give you for the high-ranking proposal, is that they are very coherent. Coherent meaning that you read through the proposal, you don't have to go back to the first page and remind yourself what you've just read. So it's almost like a story, you follow the plot. And what not to do in a proposal. I know writing a proposal is hard, we're all researchers, and sometimes you revise your proposal. And when you revise your proposal, you may have missed an objective that you don't want to include anymore. So make sure that your proposal is a coherent one, that you don't have a methodology, happens in the method section, but you don't have any literature to support it. And the writing has generally been very clear, so we're very impressed. And for the ECS in particular, I wanted to share that it is your chance to thrive, and it is okay to take some risk. It is okay to build on existing literature, see what other people have done, and bring it back to Hong Kong in the context or in the Greater Bay Area, but you may want to pay attention to the context. Is it okay to use the same measure when we measure human beings from North America or Europe and bring it directly to Hong Kong? And is it okay to use an instrument that has been normed long time ago that it may not be applicable? And finally, I also wanted to add that in this era, in this digital era, we are very tempted to do interdisciplinary work. At the same time, it is also very tempted that we bring in new ideas, such as AI, such as technology, but deep down, you are studying human beings. So put the human faces behind the technology, behind all the AI and the fanciness of technology, and remember the people who you want to study and the people who you actually want to help in your research. And finally, my last point is about the pathway to impact statement. Pathway to impact statement is about the pathway. I wanted to emphasize that because we all want to have world peace and solve all the world problems, like Professor Longton mentioned, but it's not possible. GRF is the first step, or ECS is the first step for a bigger scheme that you can build. And remember the scope and remember the size of your grant and make it achievable. Ultimately, you have to deliver your progress report and concluding report. You want to make sure that you can deliver what you promised. And so in the pathway to impact statement, it's okay to change the world, but if you can deliver it. So remember that you have to write a pathway, not necessarily the deliverable. For example, I'll give you a very simple example. If you are going to do an intervention study, you don't want to say, I'm going to change the way teachers teach in classroom in 10 years. You want to see if your intervention works first. But how is that going to help the people in the short run and in the long run? So limit the scope. It is okay to push boundary, but at the same time, you may also want to put some parameters in how far you can push that boundary. And finally, I want to congratulate those who get a grant, and for those who don't, it's okay. There's always next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lo. Please be seated. May I now invite Professor David Kelly, Senior Member of the Physical Science Panel, to the stage and share the observation of the Physical Science Panel. Professor Kelly, please.
First of all, on behalf of the Physical Sciences Panel, I think one of the first things I want to commend and congratulate all researchers is on the quality of the research proposals that we had to read. There was some excellent and outstanding science being proposed from experienced scientists, but also early career scientists. And it's wonderful to hear that the budget for early career scientists will increase in the future. I'm just going to say three things, three topics. On your objectives in your proposal, it's very important to be as clear as to what you want to do in your proposal. What problem are you trying to solve? Why are you solving it? And why does it need to be solved? Is it curiosity-driven research? Are you testing some hypothesis? What's the scientific question? And in that, when you frame those questions, it's important to think about what has been done before. And a number of comments at the Physical Sciences Panel highlighted that perhaps some of the previous work that's been done internationally hadn't been captured in the proposal. So just think about what has been done elsewhere. Be realistic about what you can achieve in your time scale with the manpower that you have and the budget that you have. And often some of the strongest proposals were those which had and included some form of target that the proposal was aiming for, be it an increase in efficiency, speeding up. If you can identify some clear metric, it means that you've thought clearly and deeply about your proposal. We're looking for a criteria for success. I mean, that's one of the ways you can look at it. In terms of the methodology, be clear on the techniques that you're using, why are you using them, and with your objectives, what happens if one of your objectives, one of the early ones, fails? Do you have a plan B? Is it worth just thinking a little bit about the risk involved? That's not to say you shouldn't consider high-risk research. Absolutely think about it. High risk, high reward. That's always going to be well received by the community. But just think what happens if one of your early objectives doesn't work. Remember, you have to have a completion report at the end. Think also about the manpower that you ask for and when you use that manpower. Most referees and most reviewers will be very happy to support a proposal that's asking for a PhD student or a research assistant. But if you're asking for more than one staff, think about when that staff is going to be deployed. Are you using all of your staff at the beginning or at the end? Which particular objectives are they trying to tackle? And then finally, in the area of outputs and impact, obviously high quality outputs are really important. It was interesting, quite a number of investigators said they would make the code that they were developing publicly available. And that's one way that you can have a wider impact beyond the academic community. And then finally, I do want to echo what we've said about pathways to impact. Reading some of the pathways to impact statements, some of them just read as a simplified summary of the proposal, rather than thinking more deeply about what can be done with the proposal, maybe who are the stakeholders or who are the end users. It's worth just thinking about that because impact is an important parameter for the RAE in 2026. But I hope they're not seen as all negative comments. I think the overwhelming message is one of congratulations. The quality of the science that we read in the physical sciences panel was outstanding. It really was. It was an absolute pleasure to read some of the proposals. And I'm sure on behalf of the panel, we wish you well. And congratulations to those of you who will be receiving good news shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kelly. Please remain on stage and proceed to the table for the Q&A session. So the Q&A session now begins. May I now invite Professor Timothy Tong, Professor Nancy Wong, Professor John Lunton, Professor Gigi Lo to come on the stage again for the Q&A session.
Thank you very much for the speakers' insightful and inspiring talks. I'm Yan Li from PolyU, and I have a question about pathway that two speakers all mentioned, that we have 1 to 3 years and 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years pathway to write. I think the 1 to 3 years, of course, is highly closely related to the project. But for myself, I often have more thinking about the 5 to 10 years. Sometimes we need to really increase the impact to other aspects. So what is the level that we can really increase the impact to all the, sometimes also increase to society level? So I hope you can share more about this. And also another question about innovation. I think for GRF, ECS, we need to have some pilot studies and good foundation. And also some people say that we can't be too innovative. So I want to know what's the extent of innovation that we need to have. Something new, but not too new. So I want to hear your perspective on this. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Anyone?
I'll make very brief comments on both your questions. In terms of impact, it can take a very long time for impact to really come to the fore. And I think one of the things that we found in the UK, particularly when we start thinking of our research assessment exercises and research excellence framework, is gathering evidence. And it's really worth your while thinking about, when you're on a project, working with end users or potential end users who may have an impact or an interest in your particular research activity. I think that would be the main thing I would say in relation to the impact.
Sure, thank you. Anyone? Gigi, you want
I can add that. Are you from social sciences? Mm-hmm. That's okay. It's still under human beings. So I think your questions, the two questions are actually related. So the innovation part is that no one will fund a project that has 0% of confidence. So this multiple objective approach in the proposal writing is actually a good stepping stone. So you can have some objective that you know how to reach the achievable goal based on prior literature or even your pilot study. And then you can have some objectives that are more innovative, that are a little bit pushing the boundaries, because that's what our job is as scholar, is we push the knowledge boundaries, that we explore territories that nobody has ever done before. And that relates to the pathway to impact statement. So remember, I focus on the word pathway. It's the step that brings your research to have a broader impact. So this is using the American NSF term of broader impacts. But at the same time, you can think about, according to your objective, are there some that have a more accumulating effects that takes a little bit longer to accumulate and make a difference? And being in social science, the pathway to impact statement is a little bit easier to write than other panels, I suppose. Because then you can think of the people who could be affected by the knowledge that you created. Now this includes, I think David has also already mentioned, who are the end user of the knowledge, and that could actually make a difference for people who may not be in the scholarly community, but who are tangentially related. So I think these two questions are actually related, so you're on the right track.
Thank you, Gigi. Anyone over here? Nancy? Okay. Maybe I can chime in a little bit. What's innovation? I think you can find many, many different definitions or explanation of what innovation is about. But the best definition or the best explanation I have heard was from a friend at MIT. Some of you may know him. And 5 words that summarizes what innovation is. New thoughts that bring value. 5 words, okay? It doesn't have to be something you're creating for new, okay? But it's a new way to look at something that enables you to derive value. I'll give you an example. Steve Jobs, we all remember who he was. He was very successful, right? He was the one who introduced the mouse to the computer, to the desktop computer. Before that technology was adopted, we had to type command statements in order to move the cursors. Remember that? Well, of course, people in this room, if you were old enough then, you were able to do that, but certainly not my mother, okay? But once the mouse was adopted to the computer system, the point and click feature enabled many, many more people to use computers. But Steve Jobs did not invent the mouse, okay? It was already invented sitting on the shelf at a laboratory in Palo Alto. And he, one time, visited that laboratory and saw this technology. And immediately something clicked. New thoughts that bring value. So he is regarded by many people as a tremendous innovator, okay? But impact is something else. It doesn't have to be innovative, okay? Impact for a long time for academics meant how well received the paper you published was. How many people would cite your papers? How many people would work off something you published and derive yet another new thing? That's impact too, okay? That's impact. But innovation, as I said, at least that interpretation of innovation, I thought was quite insightful to me. Okay, so for your thoughts. Any other questions?
I'm Chan Song from physics of Baptist University. Actually, in my department, many of our colleagues are doing the so-called interdisciplinary research, like physics, complex system, biology. So the problem we have been facing is which panel we should go to submit our proposal. Because we experienced that different panels have different expectation or requirement. Like you submit to physical science, maybe reviewer expect you to solve the problem, come up with more generic or general principle. Or biology would say, okay, can you try to understand this biological process as much as possible in detail? So the requirement is somewhat also different. So we've been facing this difficulty, where to go first. And then my question is the panel, when you see this type of proposal, how you do with that? Basically, we were asked to somewhat integrate or declare like a primary area or secondary area, or even we were asked to somewhat integrate percentage. But I want to know how our panel, how you are doing with this type of interdisciplinary project, whether you have kind of assessment across the panel, like that.
I can't comment on how the RGC determines which particular panel a proposal comes to, but I will make the following observation. One of the things we do is we allocate the external reviewers, and we do so on the basis of our reading of the proposal, the abstract, and the keywords. And when we see proposals that cross between different disciplines, we will go out of our way to select reviewers who can both look at interdisciplinary research, but also look at the more discipline-specific. When we then receive those reviewers' comments, all your proposals are read by 2 panel members, and we independently come up with a score between us, which we then feed in. So we are very conscious of that, and we don't want proposals that go across boundaries to be at a disadvantage. So my advice to you is make it clear that you're doing interdisciplinary research, make your keywords work for both, say, the physical sciences panel and also the biological and medical panels. So I think the onus is a little bit on you to make our lives a little bit easier.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Maybe one other comment that may help you. The budget, to some degree, will dictate the level of collaboration. Especially, for example, the GRF, those tend to be smaller funded projects. So it's unrealistic to have 37 participants. With that said, if you can stay within the constraints of the budget and still be able to justify that the work will be substantial, then it would be to your benefit to collaborate if you can. And then to my other comments, if you can collaborate with someone that's a seasoned veteran, you'll also benefit from learning their grantsmanship skills as well. So definitely encouraged.
Thank you. Any?
I think this is something that we don't encounter as much in the business panel, but in the occasion when we do actually have that kind of proposals, I very consciously would look for, I think, readers who actually have that skill sets to, sometimes we have to go outside of our field and to actually identify the appropriate reviewers, I think, to evaluate these proposals. But we also encourage, I think, the PIs, when they submit the proposal, to actually give us some help in clearly identifying the key areas that they're making a contribution to. That would help us tremendously in identifying the right readers to evaluate the proposal.
Okay. Was there a question over here? Yeah, please.
Yes. Thanks. I'm Liz Jackson, and I'm from the Faculty of Education at Hong Kong U. So thank you very much for this presentation. I have a question that was touched on briefly, but I would love to hear a bit more of the panelists' thoughts, which is what kind of advice can we give our colleagues when they are not successful in terms of how to decide in what case it's worth revising and resubmitting, and in what case it's worth them throwing out the project and trying something totally new in the next year. So thanks again.
So I'm the sub-panel chair of education, so I guess it would be related. Some indicators that invite revise and resubmit, so to speak, using the publication terms, is when reviewers are generally lukewarm, but then point out very constructive and specific issues, okay? And an example of when not to pursue or significantly change the research direction is when the reviewers and also the readers indicate that, so this is an example actually we see a lot, is some people will say, this is the first study to study so-and-so. Now, being a first study to be examined is not necessarily the most worthwhile question, because there are, for example, there is nobody who studied the relationship between whiskey drinking and chocolate consumption. But is it a question that worth examining? It maybe not. So being innovative, as Professor Tong has mentioned, has to have a value. So what is the value of examining that question and answering with research? Another example is pushing a boundary too far. So some projects, in my experience, I have been in the H4 panel for about 10 years. Some projects may miscalculate this impact. So for example, they push the generalization bucket too far. So if the research is in a very local area, but then they generalize to all humankind on generally how children learn, for example, then it's not a viable question. So when to resubmit is when you, I think the score is a good indicator. When you get a 3.5, it's a very good score to reconsider resubmitting. But when you get multiple reviewers comment that you can't reconcile, sometimes it's probably because the research area is a little bit too diffuse and it's hard to follow, or sometimes it's too narrow. So those are the two major factors that we generally see in education.
Thank you. Nancy, I know you have something to say about resubmission, right?
Yes,
Your
yes.
panel discussed that.
So I completely agree with Gigi's opinion about the fact that having a 3.5 is probably one of the best indication that you should really not give up on your idea and thinking about resubmission, especially pay closely to, I think, the comments and that you receive from the reviewers, because a lot of the times I think the panel are almost reluctant to give that rating because there is some burning question and issues that I think the PI has not actually addressed that we feel is that derail or sort of like diminish that rating because of an otherwise really great proposal, and we really would like to fund it, but at this point, because we don't have an answer to some of these questions, if you could address that, chances are it will get funded the next time. So please don't give up that easily.
I'll offer some thoughts, and I know it's very dangerous to generalize, so I'll generalize. The first part about delivering the news, that's tough. Of course, I mean, it stings for all of us, especially young faculty, to get a proposal, especially if it got beat up. But again, those of us that have been in the business for a while know that that is part and parcel of the gig. And kind of conveying that in a delicate and camaraderie way will help. From your perspective or from a mentorship perspective, another thing you can do is maybe you, in a leadership position, could ask a colleague to take a look at the proposal and offer their thoughts for revision. So then you have kind of both sides contributing to improving it. Now the generalization. Here's what I would say. I would probably, myself, always resubmit a proposal at least once. Even if I got tarred and feathered, I probably would resubmit it. If after a second time I'm getting consistently low reviews, even after attempting to fix the problem, then I would begin to consider whether a third is worth it.
Well, let me add to that. Generally speaking, I would always encourage PIs to resubmit also. Coming up with ideas is not easy. So when you write a proposal, usually it's because you have come to the conclusion that this is the best idea that I can put forward, right? So if that's the case, and the first time you submit and you're not successful, take a look at the comments objectively and improve on your proposal and resubmit, okay? I don't know if I'll give up after 3 times, but I would take advice from Professor Longton in this case, okay? But generally speaking, if someone is not successful the first time, by all means, improve your proposal and try again. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question about the institutional design. So I'm Gina Wu from Lina University. So I'm glad to know that actually we have more support for the young scholar. And as a young scholar, I appreciate this a lot. But I think there are some institutional hurdles for us to join the game. So for example, right, ECS, Earlier Career Scheme, is only for tenure track assistant professor. So these actually exclude a lot of research assistant professor. They are also young, and actually they're much younger perhaps than the AP, but they don't get support, and I'm one of them actually. So I think, I don't know why we actually have to, set these institutional hurdle, and I believe there are rationale behind, but perhaps we should rethink this rationale. And if we really encourage young scholar, why separate research assistant professor from assistant professor? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing up that point. RGC does have other schemes for young people who are in the research world but has not made it to the point of landing an assistant professorship yet. So postdoc researchers, we have a fellowship scheme for them. Additionally, we are always open to ideas about how else we can nurture the young people. See, the whole point is we need to have a pipeline to support people at different stages, okay? So if you have ideas about what we need to do in order to make that pipeline more continuous, we're welcome to hear your ideas. Anybody else? There's a hand over here. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So this is Fei Hao from Hong Kong PolyU, School of Hotel and Tourism Management. And I have 2 questions. So we need to write educational plan, and I want to know what are the keys to write a good educational plan. Should we focus mainly on the education of university, or we need to reach broader audience and community? And the second question is, for GRF, actually we have a choice to choose either 24 or 36 months, and we want to know the length of the project. Will the length of the project will influence our success rate? Thank you very much.
Anyone wants to take? Nancy, please.
I can't comment on the educational plan because I have not actually evaluated on too many of them, but I think in terms of the project, I guess, 24 to 36 months really depends very much on the nature of your proposal, because they are within the context of the business panel, because we have people who do analytical and theoretical modeling, and that does not involve data collection and some of this. So, the question is, if you ask for a 36-month proposal, that seems a bit excessive. And there are also certain kind of proposal that is from perhaps marketing that involves like a series of behavioral studies that they need to build from one experiment to the next and include few experiments and various other things. So a lot of that data takes a long time to collect. And so having 36 months horizon is not unreasonable. So I think it's very much depends on what is the nature of your proposal and what is it that you are attempting to study.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to supplement? Yeah, Gigi.
I can just add that education plans are usually reviewed by local members. So foreigners like ourselves, we won't have the knowledge to advise you on what to write. And in terms of the duration, I think one factor, even when I write grants, the factor that helps me to determine the duration of a grant is whether I have control over it or not. So like Nancy mentioned, if it's something under your control, that you have full control over it, then it's okay to write a shorter time, a more reasonable time frame. But if you're doing experiment, when we study human beings, it's hard to get them into the lab. And if that's uncontrollable factors, it's always safer to go a little bit longer.
Let me offer one thought, and this just comes from the engineering panel. But you may be tempted to shorten the duration of the project or scale the budget down in the hopes that a smaller ask amount might enhance your chances of success. I would say, in doing this 10 years, that that has almost never been a deciding factor. So if you have to decide whether to make it a little longer or add a little more funds, you may wish to err on the aggressive side and do that. We can always pull you back. Those of you that have gotten funded, you'll find quite often that the amount that you're awarded is less than the amount that you asked for. So there's a clamping mechanism that comes into play. So you don't have to worry. As long as you're not egregious, you'll be adjusted downward. But if you start with a small amount, it's difficult to work around that, and it probably won't influence the outcome in the end.
So thank you, panel, for this a lot of useful and also very inspiring suggestion to us. Just got the question follow-up following this resubmission problems. So I'm happy to see the panel encourage interdisciplinary studies, but I also got question like how to choose the right panel. For example, if we got the rejection from one panel, and then can we try another panel as resubmission? And also sometimes, you know, the AI technologies is developing very rapidly. So probably after 1 year, we got the new components. So previous submission, we probably have 2 objectives, and now we have 2 more to add on. So still, should we treat it as resubmission or new submission? So that's my question. Thank you.
Well, I think there are always situations where it's not clear whether you treat it as a resubmission or which panel you submit it to. But I think when you're in doubt, you always look for the truth. Okay, what do I mean by that? If you resubmit your proposal and you add something into it, and that additional thing is substantial enough that it can stand on its own as a new idea, okay? I don't know, I may treat it as a new proposal, but whether it's new or resubmission, you ought to make sure that the proposal is meritorious so that the panel will judge that this project is worthy of funding. Okay? Now, my answer may be too general to you, but that's the best I can offer you, okay? And of course, I think there was a comment earlier that if you have colleagues in the department or even in the school that who have been successful, you may seek some opinions from that person. Hey, take a look at my proposal. What do you think? What comments do you have?
I have a question that is a bit related to the question that came up with the biology and medicine panel, the issue of time. We're in the humanities. We get first and foremost judged by getting GRF grants and by writing books. And what I've encountered so far is it's not that easy always to break down a book project into small achievables that fill up, let's say, a 1 to 3 year time frame. Because what I've heard is it's much easier to get a grant for like a 2-year project or a 3-year project than if you make a 5-year project, for example. And so my question to you is, have there been any conversations about like adjusting the frameworks of GRFs specifically for the humanities so that it becomes more realistic for us to actually develop a book project in the allotted time frame and costs that come along with it. Because at the end of the day, that's really what makes our tenure case miss or fail, including getting a GRF. And have you perhaps any kind of suggestions, if that's not on the horizon, how to maintain a coherent project, even though you break it down into 2 or 3 sub-parts? Because I think we're not allowed to reutilize not large portions of a grant application next year, even if it's the same kind of larger project that we're dealing with.
So the Humanities Subpanel chair is not here, so I can only improvise and guess what he would say. I understand that in humanities, very often we have different kinds of research, very broadly defined. We have book projects that are more valued than doing experiments and writing articles. In the H panel, we also have the HSS PFS scheme, and in the GRF mechanism, or sometimes ECS, we have seen people who actually propose a deliverable of a draft of a monograph or doing some parts. So it's possible to break it down. Now, I'm not sure if GRF have a 5-year mechanism, so I don't know if that's flexible. So that's a technical question that I would have to defer to Professor Tong. But in our case, we are also humans, and the humanities panel, some of the members are actually here. They evaluate the rigor of the project and not necessarily whether you have a book to deliver. So I think there are many projects that you can break it into reasonable parts that fit into the timeline of a tenure-track professor.
My name is Mike Ashfold. I'm from the University of Bristol in England. I'm on the Physical Sciences panel. But if I was a local, maybe everybody here knows the answer to this, but I didn't fully understand the conclusion of the question about resubmissions. And particularly, it's who decides whether something is a resubmission or not. We heard an instance where maybe 2 original objectives is now expanded into 4. The application is from the same individual. It may or may not have the same title or a similar title, but who makes the judgment about whether it's a resubmission, and is this something that applicants could, in a short email, argue the case one way or the other with the RGC panel?
Well, I think it's a good point that you raised. Correct me if I'm wrong, James and Mary. I don't think we have a mechanism to identify this is a resubmission, okay? So my observation is that coming from panelists, they may say, oh, I've seen this proposal a year ago. Oh, it hasn't improved much, should not be supported. Okay. So I think the comment about resubmission comes from the panel, okay? Now, I think my response earlier is that I always encourage young people to resubmit, but with significant improvement from the previous one. It's not just changing the title and resubmit. Nancy?
I believe, based on what I could recall on those resubmission proposals that we have received, is that I think there is usually a place where the PI could indicate that this is a resubmission as opposed to a new submission.
Good.
And also, I think oftentimes there is maybe also a place to include what were the comments from the previous submission, so that when the reviewers receive these proposals, they would see how, because very often I think the resubmission happens the next year, such that, so I think a lot of the times is a revision to address what was pointed out as a confound or potential issues that the original proposal does not address. So when you resubmit, of course you need to address all the concerns that has been raised before, and then I think most of the time, resubmissions tend to be successful because, what was already considered a good proposal, and the reviewer's comments is often, oh, I see that this proposal is much improved. They have answered the questions that we've had before, so it will be approved.
Good, excellent. So there is a way for the PI to indicate. Thank you.
There's a question over there. Clara Yu, Faculty of Arts from Hong Kong Baptist University. My question is more about the Humanities and Social Sciences panel for Professor Gigi Lok. Two questions. The first one is about budget. In arts and humanities, to the best of my knowledge, it hasn't been a norm or a tradition to budget PhD students, but institutionally we've been encouraged to budget PhD students, but that would increase the budget. So I wonder what kind of practice it will be at the panel level, and if there will be an impact on the success rate. The second question is about the number of reviewers. We noticed that, colleagues, the number of reviewers that we received and reviewer reports vary a lot, crossing from 3 to 5, 6, 7 sometimes, and it might also vary at different stages. For example, for a new submission, but the number may change if it becomes a resubmission. So I wonder if you could share more about these two things. Thanks.
I'll address the budget question. So your budget, generally speaking, does not affect whether your grant is going to be funded or not right away. That is not the only factor we looked at. We mostly look at the content and the rigor of the proposal. Whether RPG students should be included in the budget, if there is a need that you can include it, but you have to justify it. So it's about the justification. We have seen budget items that are very vaguely described, that we have no idea what the student's gonna do, or in some cases we have hiring individuals that are basically doing everything. And so that's also not what we want to see as well. We want to see the PI contributing something to the project. So for that matter, I would have to defer to you as a PI, as a manager of the grant, to see what kind of needs you need. The second question is about number of reviewers. Yes, it is not easy to get reviewers. I'm just gonna put it out there. I don't know if there's a post-COVID thing, like, not only for RGC, also for journal articles. Like, I'm an editor for a journal, and it's impossible to get people to review. So the large number of reviewers is because that we are, the yearly exercise of reviewing grant, it has a very tight timeline. We want to make sure that you have at least 3 reviewers, because we don't want that you have a very small number of reviewers that you get a biased review. So we want a large number of reviewers so we can get an average impression, for example. Now, you may worry that sometimes you see reviews that are you can't address. So that's related to the question about resubmission, right? If you can't address the comment, then it's very hard to frame your proposal as a resubmission. But I can assure you, when we review the proposal, if there are comments that we don't think, or the rating and the comments should not be accounted for, we will take that into account when we review the proposal. So you have a large number, that actually means that people are interested in the work that you do.
Maybe I can add a couple thoughts too on the number of reviews. This is a vexing problem. And in fact, we spent a good amount of time on this session just a couple days ago talking about it. The minimum number of reviews is relatively easy to ensure. It's 2, not a great number, but it's relatively easy to ensure that. However, it's much, much harder to put a cap on the maximum, because typically we have to invite up to 8 people to review the proposal. Some of them will agree to do it and then not submit a proposal. And after a couple of years of that, you learn very quickly. So we tend to hedge conservatively and invite more people. If we do happen to get a larger number of reviews, 5 or 6 or 7, now you have a very confounding problem. If you allow the panel or the panel member to remove one or more of those reviews, however objective the policy might be, that's an extraordinarily slippery slope to be going down. So we discussed this. We did not come up with a clear policy, and for better or worse, the current practice is to simply deal with however many reviews that we get and live with that moving forward. It's not the answer you probably wanted. It's not the best possible solution, but it is one that seems to work as fair as possible.
We also have the same problem, and I think, when we have a large number of reviews, it's really not that big of a concern in the sense that because a lot of the times there is a fair bit of convergence in terms of opinions, and you do have some extreme, results sometimes, but then we treat them as, you read those comments carefully, and then you can actually, most readers would be responsible for identifying that this is actually an extreme opinion, and we would tend to discount that, and then we actually exercise judgment in looking at what the reviews actually said rather than just the rating itself. So I think we never really just take an average, based on the numbers of reviews that we get.
Just very quickly to follow that up, panel members do discount reviews if they are outliers or that the scores do not match the comments that are written down, or the quantity of the comments is unacceptably small. But I don't think there's any appetite to start discounting reviewers on the grounds that there are a large number of reviews that have come in. The real challenge is if you only get 2 reviews back and the comments differ and the scores differ significantly, and that's a challenge for the panel readers.
So ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we only have a few minutes before this Q&A session ends. So we will take the final question now.
Thank you very much. So I may have some challenging questions. So first is that no matter how many reviewers, so why cannot you just release the reviewer's final score to us? In paper review, we can see the final score of each reviewers. So actually in GIF, we cannot see the final score. We can see their sub-score, but not the final score. Why not release this final score to us so we can understand more clearly? Okay, this is the first question. The second question is that generally I see the GIF have 30% accepting rate, but for physical science, I think they are higher. So the problem is that if you compare the name list of accepted GIF each year, so like 80% of them are duplicated. So there are many chances to change these cases. One is that you can have like a 50% accepting rate and reduce amount, so more people will be successful. And another way is that you can, for example, you can restrict the number of GIF hold, like 2. Okay, so there are many choices. Then each year there will be different people get successful. So what we are doing is not try to compete with ourselves in Hong Kong.
Thank you for the comments. Your comments are noted. But truly, seriously, in a more perfect world, the success rate would go up substantially. Any comments? Any response?
Comment. So the success rate of humanities and social sciences is slightly lower than the science panel. Doesn't mean your productivity is low. I don't want to use other countries as example, but in North America, in general, it's less than 20%, no matter what you do. I understand that. I also recognize that we have top scholar here in Hong Kong, but ultimately this is an exercise of competition. And so I want to reiterate that social sciences funding rate does not necessarily reflect the level of productivity or the quality of productivity that social scientists can do. I will keep fighting.
Can I add a little bit?
Please.
Sure. I'm looking at the experience in terms of the NSF and NIH funding scheme in America, and coming from my own institution, I know that when we submit our proposals to NSF or NIH, the universities actually make it a point that we do not support more than 3 proposals from each institution at a time in order to prevent, I think, us competing with each other. So I think they shortlist the number of proposals from among the early submissions, and then if you are approved, then you are asked to actually submit a full proposal, and this is administered internally within the university before it goes up to the funding agency. So that's one way of managing that process. And the success rates for NIH is like less than 10%. And however, there are multiple resubmissions. So that's the thing. You almost never get funded the first time around. So I think it is a system that encourages resubmissions and continuous improvement. So I think it's something to think about. I'm not advocating that we have to do it this way, but I think it may be something that would actually help to allow us to actually focus our energy in a more productive manner, and also continuing to raise the quality of the output that we're hoping to actually encourage here.
I would like to thank you, all of you, for coming, and I believe you have a fruitful exchange of ideas during the forum today. I would also like to thank you, the Ningnan University, for organizing the visit for the members of the RGC and the subject panel, and their staff for excellent logistic support.